Welcome to the end of the world. 2 films, 1 title, and a frozen hellscape that redefined the limits of existential horror. It began with a discovery buried deep in the ice, a glowing mystery that would transform from a scientific curiosity into a nightmare. In 1951, The Thing from Another World presented a team of disciplined military men. They represented the peak of post-war confidence and unity. Their enemy was the vegetable monster, a towering humanoid organism that stalked the shadows of their metal corridors like a classic movie phantom. Even facing the unknown, these men maintained a professional camaraderie, meeting the alien threat with scientific curiosity and brave, collective action. But in 1982, John Carpenter replaced confidence with biting paranoia. Meet R.J. MacReady, a man whose survival depends entirely on his deep suspicion. Here, the crew are not a team, but weary strangers trapped together. The air is thick with frost and the weight of unspoken accusations. Every glance is a question. Every silence is a weapon. Is the person standing next to you still human or something else entirely? The horror moved from the outside to the inside. Trust literally shatters, leaving only the cold reality of a biological invasion. As the fire fades, we're left in the dark. One version fought a monster, the other fought the terrifying possibility of being alone. 2 masterpieces of dread, one defined by the strength of the group, the other by the absolute isolation of the soul.
Some were rejected before they understood.
There is a fear worse than the unknown.
There is a particular kind of dread that comes not from the unknown, but from the deeply familiar. You've seen this story before. You know the monster, the house, the doomed protagonist walking toward a door they absolutely should not open. And yet, here you are again, heart rate climbing, because someone has rebuilt the whole machine from scratch, repainted it in new colors, and dared you to be scared all over again. That is the peculiar, fascinating gamble of the horror remake.
Why are you still scared?
Between 1980 and 2000, Hollywood and independent cinema went on a remarkable binge of revisiting their most beloved nightmare fuel. The practical effects revolution had arrived. Budgets were swelling. A new generation of actors trained in method schools and experimental theater was hungry for material with teeth.
This is incredibly strong material. He's exactly what we've been looking for.
It's edgy, it's visceral. This reboot is going to be huge.
And studio executives, never the most imaginative creatures, looked at beloved horror properties and saw not sacred ground, but opportunity. The result was a wave of remakes that sometimes surpassed their originals in every measurable way, and sometimes committed crimes to cinema so egregious they practically qualified as horror themselves. What makes this era so uniquely compelling for our purposes today is the purity of the experiment. We are not talking about loose adaptations or reimaginings. We are talking about filmmakers who took the same foundational premise, the same core story, the same central terror, and asked, what happens when you rebuild this with 1980s or 1990s craftsmanship, bigger money, and different creative sensibilities? Do you get something richer, scarier, more emotionally resonant? Or do you get a pale echo, a photocopy of a photocopy, all the lines blurred? We are going to answer that question 10 times today. 10 pairs of films, same story twice over, examined for acting strength, notable flaws, and cold, hard box office reality. Buckle in. This is going to get bloody. We begin at the bottom of the world, where an alien presence threatens a small, isolated outpost of human beings who have no business surviving. Both films carry the same core dread. Something inhuman has arrived. It is extraordinarily dangerous, and the humans cannot agree what to do about it. Howard Hawks' 1951 original is a masterclass in ensemble dynamics. The acting is brisk, confident, and thoroughly rooted in post-war masculinity. A group of military men and scientists trading rapid-fire dialogue with the comfortable chemistry of a screwball comedy that happens to involve a vegetable monster. It is enormously charming, but charming is a word you rarely want attached to existential alien horror, and that is precisely the limitation here. The cast performs with great competence, but minimal genuine fear. They banter too well, recover too quickly, and feel ultimately like men who will absolutely be fine. John Carpenter's 1982 remake gives us Kurt Russell as the ultimate reluctant hero, grizzled, suspicious, brilliantly understated. Russell doesn't deliver speeches, he delivers silences. His paranoia is infectious precisely because it is so controlled, so watchful. The ensemble around him, Wilford Brimley, Keith David, Donald Moffat, all bring a raw, working-class authenticity that makes the claustrophobia feel genuine. When trust disintegrates in Carpenter's version, you believe it completely. The flaws. The 1951 film occasionally strains credibility with its breezy pacing. These people seem remarkably unbothered for individuals facing an unkillable alien. Carpenter's version, for all its genius, has a third act that slightly loses coherence as the body count rises and the paranoia becomes arguably a touch mechanical. The ambiguous ending divides audiences to this day. Box Office tells a revealing story. The 1951 original was a commercial success in its era. Carpenter's remake earned roughly $9 million domestically against a $15 million budget, considered a disappointment at release. Time, however, has issued a spectacular correction. The 1982 Thing is now canonized as one of the greatest horror films ever made, its practical effects still stunning over 40 years later. Advantage, the remake, by a significant margin in virtually every category except historical charm.
From Antarctic paranoia to feline seduction, we enter a very different kind of horror, one rooted in sexuality, transformation, and the terror of one's own desires. Val Lewton's 1942 original is a film of extraordinary restraint. Simone plays Irena, a woman who believes herself descended from a race of people who transform into cats when sexually aroused. The horror is almost entirely implied. Shadows, sounds, the click of heels on a dark street. And Simone is luminous, delicate, melancholy, genuinely tragic. She makes Irena's curse feel like a burden of the soul rather than a special effect. The supporting cast, including Kent Smith as her well-meaning but dull husband, is appropriately human and slightly outclassed. Paul Schrader's 1982 reimagining stars Nastassja Kinski and Malcolm McDowell as siblings navigating the same dark mythology. But Schrader blows the doors off Lewton's careful restraint and floods the screen with explicit content, lush cinematography, and Giorgio Moroder's hypnotic score. Kinski is genuinely magnetic, otherworldly, sensual, and convincingly strange. McDowell, meanwhile, brings a theatrical intensity to his role that occasionally tips into camp, but mostly holds the line. The film is far more explicit, far more visually ambitious, and far more uneven. The flaw in the remake is its willingness to abandon mystery for spectacle. Luton understood that what you don't see is always more frightening. Schrader understands that Nastasia Kinski, photographed by John Bailey, looks extraordinary, and he is not entirely wrong, but the horror evaporates somewhat in the brightness. The 1942 original, for its part, suffers only from the limitations of its era. Its male characters are cardboard, and its climax is abrupt. Commercially, the 1982 Cat People performed modestly, not a hit, not a disaster, and has since settled into a cult reputation built largely on its aesthetic audacity. The 1942 original is a landmark of psychological horror that still teaches. Advantage, the original, by the narrowest of margins, on pure terror, though the remake wins on visual ambition. Few horror remakes have so completely and decisively eclipsed their source material as David Cronenberg's 1986 masterpiece. The 1958 Fly, directed by Kurt Newman, tells the story of a scientist whose teleportation experiment mingles his DNA with a fly, with gruesome results. David Hadison plays the scientist with a certain 1950s square-jawed solemnity, and the film has genuine atmosphere and a memorably unsettling climax. But it is ultimately a B-movie with A-movie aspirations, held back by budget, the conventions of its era, and a certain emotional shallowness at its core. Paul Schrader's 1982 reimagining stars Jeff Goldblum in what is, without exaggeration, one of the most extraordinary physical and emotional performances in horror history. Goldblum plays Seth Brundle not as a generic, tragic scientist, but as a fully realized human being, brilliant, awkward, funny, vulnerable, and ultimately heartbreaking. Watching him transform across the film's second act is genuinely devastating, not merely disgusting. Gina Davis, as her journalist lover, matches him with an emotional authenticity that the film desperately needed. Her terror and grief are entirely credible. The chemistry between them is so real that the body horror lands as tragedy rather than spectacle. The 1986 Fly's flaws are minor. The film occasionally lets its romance linger a beat longer than its momentum requires, and a dream sequence involving a maggot baby has divided audiences and critics for decades. The 1958 original's flaws are more fundamental. Its acting ranges from adequate to earnest, and its effects, while creative for their time, inspire more sympathy than horror today. Budget and box office? The 1986 Fly cost approximately $15 million and earned over $60 million worldwide, a stunning commercial and critical success that remains Cronenberg's most commercially achieved work. The 1958 original was profitable but modest. Advantage, the remake, comprehensively and joyfully.
It's not the machine. It's what the machine showed.
From the sublime to the gloriously schlocky, and we mean that with absolute affection. The Blob is one of horror's great democratic monsters. It has no personality, no motivation, no dialogue. It just absorbs everything in its path. The drama, inevitably, comes from the humans trying to survive it. Irvin Yeworth's 1958 original features a young Steve McQueen in essentially his first film role, and McQueen, being McQueen, is magnetic even when the script gives him little to do. He plays a typical rebellious teenager, and he plays it with an easy, cool charisma that is wildly disproportionate to the material around him. The film is charming, slow by modern standards, and undeniably a product of 1950s teen movie conventions grafted onto science fiction horror. Chuck Russell's 1988 remake is a significantly nastier piece of work, and it knows it. The acting is competent but not spectacular. Kevin Dillon and Shawnee Smith are likable leads without being remarkable. But the film compensates with outstanding practical effects, a willingness to kill characters the audience likes, and a gleeful commitment to escalating gore that feels genuinely transgressive for a mainstream horror release. The Blob of 1988 is not cute. It is acidic, fast-moving, and visually inventive in ways that still impress. Flaws? The 1958 Blob has significant pacing problems in its first act and occasional acting that strains credulity. The 1988 version introduces a government conspiracy subplot that feels grafted on from a different film entirely, and its characterization can be perfunctory. But its third act is a blast of sustained, confident horror filmmaking. Box office, the 1958 Blob, made for around $250,000, earned over $4 million, an enormous return. The 1988 remake, with a budget nearing $20 million, earned only $8 million domestically, making it a disappointment that has since found enormous appreciation on home video. Advantage: the remake on craft and effects, the original on cultural footprint and McQueen charisma. Now for something entirely different, a horror comedy about a carnivorous plant and the hapless florist's assistant who tends it, twice over in two wildly different registers. Roger Corner's 1960 original was shot in approximately 2 days and carries all the gloriously ragged energy that implies. It is funny, fast, absurdist, and features a very young Jack Nicholson in an unforgettable small role as a masochistic dental patient that practically vibrates off the screen. The acting is broadly comedic and entirely appropriate for what the film is: a lark, a joke, a 60-minute celebration of cinematic improvisation. Frank Oz's 1986 musical remake, based on the successful stage show, is a genuinely lavish production, with Rick Moranis, Ellen Greene, Steve Martin, Bill Murray, and an extraordinary puppet plant named Audrey II, voiced and performed by a team of incredible practical effects artists. Moranis is perfectly cast as Seymour, sweet, bumbling, morally compromised, and his journey is surprisingly affecting. Ellen Greene reprises her stage role and is absolutely electric. Her voice, her mannerisms, her emotional authenticity make Audrey one of cinema's genuinely underrated female characters. Steve Martin's sadistic dentist is a comedic set piece of sustained brilliance. Flaws: the 1986 musical's original theatrical ending, closer to the stage.
Feed me, Seymour, feed me tonight.
Closer to the stage show, darker and more satisfying, was replaced with a happy ending after test audiences revolted, and the film is weaker for it. The 1960 original is too slight to have structural flaws. Its limitations are simply those of its budget and ambition. Commercially, the 1986 film earned a healthy $72 million worldwide against a $30 million budget, and the Alan Menken score became genuinely iconic. Advantage, the musical remake, with enormous affection for the original's scrappy spirit.
And that is where we leave things for today. We already covered the first 5 horror remake battles earlier, but the nightmare is not over yet. In the next video, we go deeper into the final 5 matchups. Zombies, creepy children, haunted mansions, psychological killers, and one of the most pointless remakes Hollywood ever produced. We will break down which versions aged badly, which ones still work, which actors carried the films, and which directors completely misunderstood what made the original special in the first place. Stay tuned, because the next part includes Night of the Living Dead, Psycho, The Haunting, Village of the Damned, and House on Haunted Hill. And trust me, some of these remakes deserve to be buried and never dug back up.